We are now in part 7 of our presentation of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And after we have discussed that everyone agrees that the highest good is happiness, but then disagrees about what happiness is, we are now moving forward to discuss 4 conceptions of happiness. And in this presentation, in this part 7, we're going to discuss the first conception of happiness, which is pleasure, and then we'll look at the criticisms of it. Aristotle claims that persons will usually, in speech, say what happiness is according to how they live, according to their way of life. And for our purposes, there are roughly 4 ways of life, and accordant 4 attempted definition of happiness that Aristotle offers for our consideration. The first of these is pleasure. There are people who live as if the highest good is pleasure and enjoyment, and do everything for the sake of it. It would not be odd to hear people say that happiness is pleasure. I'm sure we all know some folks that would say that, and probably we are not unlikely to say that happiness is pleasure ourselves. Aristotle claims that this cannot be the highest good and happiness by calling such a life worthy of beasts or animals and calling this life slavish. In order to make sense of this claim, let us imagine a person whose every desire is satisfied by others, such that they do not have to do anything. In a more contemporary sense, perhaps that is a person who does not leave their room and plays video games or watches films or does whatever online, and all of their food and other needs are taken care of by someone else. These persons are full of pleasure, yet we would not say that that is happiness. Or a person who continually consumes heavy narcotics and is in a constant state of pleasure. Again, we would not call such persons happy. There's something good in their lives, there's pleasure, but there is much more to being a fulfilled human being than just pleasure. Imagine a cow in the pasture field chewing cud in a complete state of pleasure. Aristotle compares the life of those who choose pleasure as their highest good to such a cow. In this sense, their life is beastly. Let us make the same point more theoretically. Pleasure is a rather passive sort of a thing. It is something that happens to us. It is something that we receive. One can be doing absolutely nothing and can be in the state of pleasure at the same time. Action is a hindrance and a distraction away from pleasure, and is only a necessary evil we have to suffer to obtain pleasure. If we could skip to the pleasure of action without doing the action, we would, from the standpoint of pleasure as the highest good. From the standpoint of pleasure, ideally, one does as little as possible while pleasure happens to them. In this sense, Aristotle calls life devoted to enjoyment a passive life. And a properly human life that is happiness is an active life. As we already hear in a common sense discussion of happiness, that adds that happiness is some kind of a doing well and some kind of a living well, as opposed to doing nothing and being passive. Human beings are, by their nature, active beings, and their highest good or happiness cannot be a passivity. Human beings as active, human beings as active comes to light next in the second way of life and its accordant definition.